Good morning, everybody. So my name's Richard, and wanting to open up the session, just really introducing the bigger picture concept of what we are talking about. And it's a very, the heart of this time, to put it out there up front, is really about developing the science that can be applied in a very real world situation where we are in the context of catchment management, and the issues of catchment management they carry great weight in society because the results have implications for people. And it's not just about water, there's people are living in these catchments, there's livelihoods at stake, there's the whole socio-economy of a region that has to be considered. It's a multivariate problem which is rooted in the science, but it's incredibly important that we get the science right. So I'm speaking today to the conservation scientists of our generation, and I'm going to be putting forward an argument to say that we want to avoid this one-size-fits-all approach to how we think about and, in a sense, how we legislate and influence the decisions taken on a landscape through the policy environment. This project is being done through the GEF5 SANBI, mainstreaming biodiversities into municipalities. It's a multi-year project that's about halfway through, and our focus area, which is that black-lined area in the map, showing the Umgungundlovu district municipality, which is what you're in right now, and it's an area that is characterized by two big industry or agricultural sectors, timber and sugar, and we will speak a little bit about that. So the way we're thinking about this really is about the focus is on our wetlands and our water resources, the physical aspects of our water resources, the rivers and the wetlands, and we are looking at how these get delineated and buffered, not the technical how, not how to tell where the edge is, but really how do you buffer them in a sensible way within these production landscapes. And it's the focus of our work really looks at what is, in summary, a cost-benefit analysis. So we understand that there are hydrological and other benefits and biodiversity benefits to doing delineation and buffering, so we will be examining those. We will also be looking at some of the economic and societal costs to the delineation and buffering. And at the end of the day, we are going to be proposing an alternative to a one-size-fits-all, that we have a way of thinking, a strategic way of thinking that says, well, we want to consider the catchment, the sub-catchment, the basins, where they have a unique context, a unique current configuration of land use, and we're wanting to say, well, if we can consider that, we maybe would come up with an approach to buffering and delineation that gives you the greatest value for your investment, which is really what we are talking about. So in a nutshell, where we're going with this is a cost-benefit analysis, where on one side we'd be weighing up the benefits of water security and however you are thinking about water security, and there's some biodiversity benefits of habitat and connectivity, but that all comes at a cost, and that cost is borne primarily in a socio-economic environment where you've got cost of delineation, you're expecting landholders to pull out of areas where they've previously grown their crops, timber or sugar, so you've got increased, in a sense, land that is unprofitable, but not just that, it's also has to be managed, so you're not only earning money from that, no longer earning money from your land, but you are having to put money in to keep weeds and fire and whatever else in the place. There's potential loss of employments. And very significantly, there's also quite a big biodiversity cost, which will come into play if one delineates in a landscape which was previously a production landscape. There is a risk that you create a corridor network for alien plants, because the management of some of these areas is difficult and may not be done correctly, and therefore you'd actually be creating, as I say, a corridor network across our landscape for weeds. And also another thing is about management influence. So I think we would all recognize that biodiversity conservation cannot rely on protected areas, and there's a huge sort of drive within the conservation science to look at how do we conserve biodiversity in the production landscapes. And that really speaks about management influence. You want to be able to influence landowners and managers and sensitize them to biodiversity management on their lands. And one of the ways that is done is through certification schemes and other similar types of approaches. But the moment you make things too onerous, as an individual landowner will be weighing up, is it worth my while to be under this management scheme or not? And you don't want to tip it in the favor of a lot of people coming out of certification type systems because you have reduced influence on the landscape. So those are just some of the things we'll be looking at. Not all of it today. I'm just trying to paint a bigger picture of where we're going with all of this. So just to sketch out today, I'm going to be speaking initially around something of the water resources within the district municipality based on a new data set that I've developed, and what are the implications or what are the opportunities that that data set presents for this analysis. I then will hand over to Bruce Scott-Shaw, who's going to be trying to unpack for us something of the hydrological responses that we can expect from different scenarios of delineation and buffering within the sector. So in other words, if you pull out this much timber from these particular areas, or sugar, whatever it might be, you can expect something of a hydrological response, and we'll see if see what comes from that. Then I've asked Janet Edmonds, who represents or works for the Sus Farms within the Sus Farms project, which is based within the sugar district and around Wartburg and right down to Richmond. And she'll be looking at some of the implications of this for the sugar sector. In other words, looking at the costs that the sugar sector will bear, with a combination of a regional sort of a summary, as well as something what it would mean for individual landholders. And in a similar vein, Steve Gemishuizen will be looking at how this will have impacts within the timber industry and how we can understand those. And then I will try to close the session, or in a sense lead us into discussion, where I will present something or one model that I think could work towards strategic or multiple ways to implement this. In other words, not one size fits all for our Mgeni catchment. So that's really what the session is. I really want to emphasize this is not about just coming to listen to a whole lot of technical talks. It's about, I'd really love for you guys to consider how we can implement what we're talking about. The science in this case is relatively simple, if I can use that phrase, although I look at Bruce's work and there's nothing simple about it. You've got to have to engage your brain when we talk about hydrology and hydrological models. But at the end of the day, the science is not the limiting factor, it's the implementation, as is often the case. And we are talking about quite a complex implementation scenario, which actually has quite significant implications for the way we think about land use and water in our country in particular. So we are aiming this time towards discussion, and we've given an hour or so of time for that towards the end of that this. So please, if I can be so bold as to ask, I understand it's sometimes you can listen and also tap a keyboard at the same time, but I'd encourage you to try and engage, because it's not because our stuff's not because we have inflated opinions of ourselves, but we would really value your input in all of this. So just to talk a little bit about wetlands and delineation. Wetlands, when you look at wetlands in a landscape like this, they occur at a very fine scale. The biggest difficulty we really deal with when we come to regional policy and legislative thinking, or anything where you're making a decision at a whole landscape, a region, a province, or the KZN Midlands, or anything like that, is you're making a decision in the case of wetlands around a very small piece of land. Anything, it could even be a few hundred square meters of land, and the issues of multiple scale become very, very significant. And the delineation, the actual finding the edge of a wetland, is a very time-consuming and tedious process, typically done in the field by examining the soil that you would dig out the ground with an auger, and you would look for the indicators in the soil for that. But again, this is something that would be done if you were contending, or needing to find the exact boundary of a wetland. But you just practically can't do this at a regional scale. There's just no way I mean, the cost of doing it is very significant. And so really what it boils down to is, how do we determine where wetlands are or likely to be within the production sector? So it's all very good and well to find the edge of a wetland and a grassland where you can still walk and see where you are. But when you get under a crop, a standing crop of timber or something like that, or sugar, it's much harder. So what we really are saying is that we've got we need fine-scale data to make decisions at a regional scale. And the data set that I've been developing over the last while is basically a fine-scale wetland map, digitized, in a sense, using human eye and interpretation, the human mind to interpret fine-scale 5-meter topographic contours, looking at the combination of aerial photographs and contours, and developing, in a sense, my estimation, it really is a personal thing, but I think it's defendable, estimation of where you would find the water resources within any one region. I've done it I'm doing it for the entire district municipality, so far I've done about halfway, but I've finished the Umgeni catchment, so all of that on the left-hand side. But you can see as you zoom in, it becomes, done at a 1 in 5,000 scale map. And in terms of its accuracy, there are problems with it. It's not perfect. It's a human estimation of maps. You know, if you're digitizing, you wobble your mouse and you bump off 5 or 10 meters to the left, but it's quite a random error. So when you are interpreting it at a regional scale, it's reasonable. It's certainly a lot more accurate than anything else we have to work with. I think quite a significant point, though, is the concept of the A or B class distinctions. So rivers are graded according to whether they are A class or B class or C class, and it really is an interaction of the soil water with the level of the depth of the channel. And your A class are the right at the top, where you don't have a groundwater, in a sense, sitting above the channel depth. And typically those are exempt from delineation, but it's almost impossible to tell on an aerial photograph. So there's probably an over-prediction of those, but it's just one of the limitations of the thing. Some of the areas are validated where it was quite contentious, using the historical aerial photographs to go back before timber. And at the end of the day, to summarize the results for the catchment. This is for 11 quaternary catchments, which range in size from 22 to almost 70,000 hectares. So we're dealing with a total of 400 and almost 10,000 hectares of land. So these water resource areas, because they're not only wetlands, it's also riparian zones and even farm dams and things like that. We're dealing with about 48,000 or so hectares. It's a significant portion of our landscape, with a perimeter of that perimeter I put in there because it gives you an indication of how significant this would be for management. If you are requiring delineation and buffering, you're talking about doing it around almost 20,000 kilometers of land. It's a lot of areas. If you add a buffer to that of 20 meters, you increase it, almost double it to 87,000 hectares. And so we're looking at between 7 and almost 20% of any one catchment. And I'm not going to speak about that. If I, just to set up the platform for the next two speakers, if one looks at the implications for timber, you'll see that within the Umgeni catchment, we're looking at almost 90,000 hectares of timber across multiple ownership, which is about, can be anything from 5 to 70% of the quaternary catchment area. Within the delineated areas, in other words, these are now essentially trees within wetland areas. We're looking at about 2,800 hectares. If you add the buffer to that, it goes up almost 3 times to 7,500 hectares. So we're talking about a significant impact or overlap. In the sugar industry, there's approximately 33,000 hectares of sugar. About 870 of it hectares is lying within the actual delineated areas. If you buffer it by 20 meters, you're looking at about 2,000 hectares. So significant impacts. So going forward now, I'm going to hand over to the next speakers, to Bruce, and then Janet and Steve will talk about the industry-specific aspects of this, the implications of this. At the end of the day, we are dealing with a land use. This map shows in black where the timber is, in red is timber, the black is where the sugar is, and the blue in between, nested within all of this, is the water resources. We are dealing with essentially three main land use activities that we're wanting to get three things out of this landscape: timber, sugar, and water, and really the question is going to be how best do we do that. Thank you very much.